man named Lemuel Gulliver wakes up in his cluttered New York apartment and starts his morning routine. He chats animatedly with his superhero figurines on the shelf and dances in the shower, showing off his quirky, playful personality. Gulliver works in the mailroom at a New York newspaper. That day, he meets a new colleague named Dan and strikes up a friendship. Gulliver supervises Dan in the mailing department. As they carry out their deliveries, they run into Darcy Silverman, a journalist whom Gulliver has admired from afar for years, but has never confessed his feelings to. Later, Dan reveals a notice stating he's been promoted to head of the mail department on his very first day. Gulliver, who has been working there for a decade without recognition, feels disheartened. Dan taunts him, claiming Gulliver lacks the courage to speak up and will never advance beyond his mailroom role. Distraught, Gulliver leaves the office and notices Darcy working late. Summoning all his courage, he goes to her office to ask her out, but his nerves get the better of him, and he simply picks up a random paper from her desk before leaving. Darcy asks if he'd like to take on a travel writing assignment, and a flustered Gulliver nervously agrees, tasked with submitting a travel blog the next day. At home, he quickly compiles several online articles for the assignment. The following day, he turns it into Darcy, who is impressed by his work and gives him a new task. She wants him to travel to the Bermuda Triangle and write an article about the mysterious disappearances of ships there. Eager to impress her, Gulliver agrees. Darcy arranges a contact and a boat for him. The very next day, Gulliver flies to Bermuda, where a man picks him up and guides him to a rented boat, showing him how to operate it. The boat is automated, making the voyage straightforward. Gulliver finally sets sail for the Bermuda Triangle alone. For the first few hours, he relaxes, reading How to Build a Robot magazines and sipping multiple cans of Coke. Eventually, he falls asleep. Later, he wakes to find a massive wave looming before him. A violent sea storm erupts, and Gulliver quickly dons a life jacket. The boat is violently tossed by the turbulent water. Turning around, he sees an enormous sea tornado advancing toward him. The storm lifts his boat atop the tornado and thrusts him directly into its eye. The screen cuts to black. When Gulliver regains consciousness, he discovers he cannot move his body. Looking down, he is stunned to see tiny men standing atop his chest. Their leader introduces himself as Commander Edward Edwardian of Lilliput. The camera pulls back, revealing a crowd of miniature people surrounding Gulliver. He is pinned to the ground with small ropes and pieces of wood. Commander Edward calls him a beast. Alarmed, Gulliver shouts in fear and easily snaps free from the restraints. Believing it to be a dream, he closes his eyes. Edward orders his soldiers to restrain him again, and they hook his pants to force him unconscious. When Gulliver awakens, he finds himself tied to a cart being dragged into the Lilliput kingdom. Tiny citizens emerge from their homes to see the beast. Gulliver is brought into the royal palace and presented to King Theodore of Lilliput. The king's daughter, Princess Mary, takes pity on him and questions Edward about the necessity of the restraints. Edward claims Gulliver is a spy from their enemy kingdom, Lafutia. Finally able to speak, Gulliver asks the king where he is. King Theodore's secretary, Jinx, informs him that he is in Lilliput, the greatest nation in the world. Gulliver suspects a prank and looks for the non-existent cameraman to prove it. In the next scene, he is shown imprisoned inside a cave. There he meets Horatio, a fellow prisoner, sentenced to life by Edward for attempting to court Princess Mary. Edward approaches again, speaking to them and mockingly referring to Horatio as a lame ass. When the furious Edward threatens to lock them up for life, Gulliver boldly claims that lame ass refers to someone who is courageous. Pleased with this explanation, Edward takes both prisoners out to a field to plow it, relying on Gulliver's immense strength. He restrains Gulliver using a mechanical device. Suddenly, 2 bell rings echo from the palace, signaling that Lafutia has launched an attack. Their enemies are attempting to kidnap Princess Mary and have set the palace on fire. Edward rushes toward the palace, commanding everyone not to rescue the princess because he wants to be the one to save her. However, Horatio urges Gulliver to intervene, knowing Edward will not reach her in time. Using his incredible power, Gulliver easily defeats the Lilliputian soldiers and rescues Princess Mary. Meanwhile, King Theodore and his secretary are trapped within the burning palace. In a moment of quick thinking, Gulliver extinguishes the flames by urinating on the building. The citizens cheer as the fire is put out, and the king is saved. King Theodore immediately frees Gulliver and Horatio from imprisonment and thanks them for their heroism. He also invites everyone to a grand feast that evening to celebrate the occasion. Edward, however, seethes with anger at someone else receiving credit for bravery. During the feast, the king asks Gulliver about his origins, and he replies that he is from Manhattan. The people assume that he must have been the president of Manhattan, given his heroic deeds. For the first time, Gulliver feels like a true hero and fabricates a story, claiming he was called President the Awesome. The crowd believes him completely except for Edward, who remains skeptical. The next day, the people of Lilliput construct an enormous residence for Gulliver, complete with all the facilities he lacked during his time in New York. At Gulliver's request, the king dispatches a search party to locate his washed-up boat. Gulliver also has a theater built to accommodate all the kingdom's residents. Gulliver then stages a dramatic reenactment of the Titanic's sinking, presenting it as a story of his own life. Everyone marvels at the supposed hardships he has endured. Edward inquires how he survived the drowning, and Gulliver claims he was resuscitated. Later, Horatio asks for Gulliver's help to impress Princess Mary, and Gulliver agrees. Together, they approach the palace, where Horatio tries to woo the princess. Hidden from view, Gulliver recites the lyrics of the song Kiss, prompting Horatio to repeat them. By the end, the princess begins to fall for Horatio. Their moment is interrupted when Edward arrives to court her. As the kingdom's bravest man, Edward and Princess Mary are expected to marry. Though she isn't fond of Edward, she cannot seem to avoid him. Meanwhile, elsewhere, the search party discovers Gulliver's washed-up boat, along with cans of Coke. Upon arriving at the scene, Gulliver finds that his phone is still functional and sees 12 voice messages from Darcy, who is furious that he plagiarized his travel article. Darcy is now tasked with sailing the same route Gulliver took to research the Bermuda Triangle herself. Realizing he does not want to return to New York and face Darcy, Gulliver decides to remain in Lilliput permanently. Edward is displeased with this decision and voices his suspicion about Gulliver to the king. The king, however, dismisses Edward's concerns, asserting his trust in Gulliver. As a reward for his continued presence, the king names Gulliver the new general and demotes Edward to vice-general. Envious and spiteful, Edward disables Lilliput's defense systems, leaving the kingdom vulnerable to Blefuscia's next assault. The Blefuscian soldiers and their king seize the opportunity and prepare an immediate attack, advancing by water and firing cannonballs at Lilliput. As the newly appointed general, Gulliver is responsible for defending the kingdom. Nervously, he steps into the water and splashes around, using his massive size to render the cannonballs ineffective. Ultimately, he defeats the invading Blefuscians, becoming the savior of Lilliput. The grateful citizens grant Gulliver every wish. They construct a miniature Times Square to remind him of home, adopt clothing similar to his, and assign soldiers to cut his hair and give him massages, ensuring he is comfortable and celebrated throughout the kingdom. One night, Edward forcefully enters Princess Mary's chamber, insisting that, as her suitor, he has the right to come in whenever he pleases. The princess, finally fed up, tells him bluntly that she does not love him and wants him to stop pursuing her. Infuriated, Edward storms off to Blefuscia to seek assistance from their king. Edward's men discover Gulliver's Build Your Robot book that washed up with him, and the Blefuscian king agrees to help construct a robot using the instructions to challenge Gulliver. A few days later, Gulliver is exploring the miniature Times Square model when the palace bells ring, signaling an impending attack. Gulliver prepares to defend the kingdom against tiny invaders, but is taken aback when a massive robot, piloted by Edward himself, looms in front of him. Edward demands a duel. Gulliver has no choice but to accept. He attempts to push the robot, but it is far stronger than him. The machine lifts Gulliver by his pants and forces him to acknowledge his defeat. Gulliver admits that all claims about being president were lies, shocking the king and the princess with his betrayal. As punishment, Edward banishes Gulliver to a forbidden place known as the island where we dare not go. Upon arrival, Gulliver is discovered by a gigantic little girl who mistakes him for a toy. She places him in her Barbie-style house and dresses him in girly pink outfits. Back in Lilliput, the body of Darcy washes ashore. Gulliver had previously told the citizens that she was his princess from back home, so Edward recognizes her and imprisons her as well. Darcy is confined alongside King Theodore and his queen, who were captured after Gulliver's defeat. Determined to rescue Gulliver, Horatio travels to the Forbidden Island. Shrunk to a minuscule size, he navigates the giant environment and reaches Gulliver safely. Inside the little girl's dollhouse, they even discover the skeleton of a deceased U.S. Air Force pilot. Using a parachute, Gulliver manages to escape and fly back to Lilliput. His first stop is the prison, where he confesses his feelings to Darcy. She forgives him for plagiarizing the article and begins to warm up to him. Gulliver decides to challenge Edward once more, not to prove his courage, but to genuinely protect Lilliput. The next day, the duel begins. Gulliver demands that Edward return the kingdom to King Theodore if he wins. If he loses, Edward will destroy the entire realm. Edward initially overpowers him within seconds. Horatio rushes in to assist and climbs inside the robot. From within, he takes control and defeats Edward, eventually shutting down the robot's power. Gulliver then easily finishes off the machine, and the crowd erupts in cheers. Even Darcy celebrates his triumph. As a reward for his heroism, Horatio is granted permission to court Princess Mary, and the two share a kiss. In a last-ditch effort, Edward, now completely insane, seizes the princess as a hostage. Finally fed up, the princess fights back and overpowers Edward. At that moment, Darcy kisses Gulliver for the first time. The Blefuscian king and King Theodore are poised to reignite the war, but Gulliver intervenes. Using the lyrics of Edwin Starr's War, he successfully negotiates peace between the rival island nations. In the final scenes, Gulliver and Darcy return to New York City aboard their repaired ship. A few weeks later, Gulliver has left his mailroom job behind and established himself as a travel writer. He and Darcy are now happily together, and the film concludes as the couple walks out of Darcy's office hand in hand, signaling a bright, new chapter in their lives. Like and subscribe for more recaps like this.